Now, there are a lot of techniques that you can learn that will take your FlutterFlow and general no-code knowledge to the next level. I've covered a lot of these techniques on my channel, and basically these techniques fall into one of two categories. Some of the techniques apply to a specific knowledge domain, so they apply to a specific feature set. And a bunch of other techniques, they apply to a lot of different things, a lot of different knowledge domains. But there's one overarching technique, one thing that if you learn it just a little bit, is going to take your no-code, and especially using tools like FlutterFlow, knowledge and experience, and most importantly, confidence, to the next level. And actually, just recently, I did a survey on my Patreon page where I asked my supporters, what is that one topic you want me to cover in depth? What is that one topic you want me to make a lengthy video on? And the majority of people actually mentioned this specific knowledge domain that you want me to expand on. And to be completely honest with you, I did not expect people to mention this specific area. I didn't think people were interested in learning this specific area, although it's going to make all the difference when it comes to building your no-code and FlutterFlow apps. And although this is a no-code channel, and absolutely the honest truth is that you can build amazing, sophisticated, and complex apps without writing a single line of code. But the reality is that just by learning a little bit of code, just by understanding how code actually fits in and how it's used by these no-code builders and what role it plays when it comes to building the app that you really want to build, is going to drastically catapult your knowledge, especially with tools like FlutterFlow, and will give you the ability and most importantly the confidence of building exactly the kind of apps that you really want to build. Now, before we begin, as always, all the apps and all the resources I will be working with in this video are going to be available on my Patreon page, the link to which you're going to find in the description below. And so in today's video, I want to talk about the bare minimum level of code that you need to know and need to understand in order to truly make your apps shine. And really, most importantly, that's going to give you the ultimate confidence to go out and build any kind of app that you truly want. You're never going to be limited by these tools ever again. First, I'm going to show you some of the examples where I've used code before, and you're going to immediately see that in these examples, I'm using barely even a couple of lines of code to do something very, very powerful and to achieve a certain objective. I'm going to be talking about where code fits in, how it acts as the glue in terms of linking the functionality that you want with the functionality that you are already provided. I'm also going to talk about the basics of code, the very, very basics of code that you need in order to succeed with tools such as FlutterFlow. And last but not least, I'm going to show you a couple of advanced concepts that are going to come in handy when you are building your apps. And I'm going to be answering a couple of questions that people had in their comments when it comes to certain functionalities that they wanted to achieve but they couldn't before. So the first thing I want to show you is I want to show you some of the examples where I've written code in some of the previous apps. And so I went ahead and I picked 3 random apps from a list of apps that I worked on, and I want to show you how I've written code and what this code does, and also show you the scope of this code. In many cases, this is going to be barely 2 lines or so. And this is the first app that I want to show you. And the goal of this app is to do kind of a quiz with flip cards. And so we are using this flippable card widget provided to us by FlutterFlow. And it works great. It does exactly what we want. But in certain situations, there is a need for custom code. And so an example here, we have a page here that lists various words, and the idea here is that you click on it and it's going to flip and it's going to show you the other language. So we're doing English to foreign language or foreign language to English, and this way we are presenting an interface where people can memorize words in a foreign language. And in this case, we have a container and we need to display just one word from this list. And so I have here a custom function. If I go in here, I have one custom function called getWord. And if I show you the code right here, you will see that it has just one line. And so this is going to be the theme in some of these other examples. Okay, so here I have another app, and this is an app that I've built to display various courses. Okay, so this could be a marketplace, or this could be your own app that you've built to give people access, mobile access to some of the courses that you're selling in various categories. And so we have the homepage here, we have courses here, which is a grid view. We have lessons, which is a list view, and we have the individual lesson here. And so in this lessons, we have a custom function called add1. Okay, and so if we come in here, and all this custom function does really is it adds the number 1 to the value provided. And why are we doing that? Well, the reason we're doing it is we're creating a list. And so in this case, it makes sense to increment each of these values by 1. The next example that I want to show you is a tip calculator. And this is also an app I've built. I have a video on it. You can search on the channel. And the purpose here is that you're entering the amount on the bill, and then you have a slider where you can calculate the percentage that you want to pay when it comes to the tip. And so it's going to show you the tip amount, and it's also going to show you the total amount. Okay, and here you have a grid view that's going to display a keypad. So instead of entering this value manually, you can just click on these numbers, and you're going to input the digits this way. And so if we go to custom functions, we actually have a bunch of custom functions. We have 4 custom functions. And if we take a look at the code here, we have a custom function that has 1 line of code. The next custom function has 1 line of code. The third custom function has, let's see, 1 line of code. And the last custom function is 1 line of code. And so pretty much in all of these 3 examples, all the custom functions have exactly 1 line of code. But there will be situations where you might have a custom function every now and again that's going to have maybe 5 to 10 lines of code. And so now that I've shown you some of the examples from the previous apps, I want to assuage your fears by letting you know that this is not going to be a situation where you're going to be writing something serious. This is not going to be a situation where you're going to be writing something very, very important. You're not going to be building a tool from scratch unless that is something that you want to do. But what we're talking about here is just creating a couple of lines of code, maybe 1 or 2 lines, or maybe a little bit more, that's going to essentially do something very, very important. Now, before we kind of dive a little bit deeper, I want to explain to you why we are doing this in the first place. Okay, you may be wondering, okay, FlutterFlow is an amazing tool. It does a lot of things. People use it. People build amazing apps with it. It's based on Flutter, which is an industry-wide framework for building mobile apps, and not only really. Why do we need custom code? Why do we need to learn code? Well, here I have a diagram, and this is going to help you better to kind of visualize and explain to you why in FlutterFlow you need to know a little bit of code, or why by knowing a little bit of code you will be able to build a much more robust apps, and you're going to have the confidence to do so. So here we have a FlutterFlow app, and we have a couple of things as part of this FlutterFlow app. We have the built-in logic, which is pretty much all FlutterFlow is, right? It does a lot of things behind the scenes. It displays data, it has, events, it has input, it has widgets, it's displaying various things in a widget, you can input data. So all of that is taken care of by FlutterFlow, which is really the main reason why we're using it in the first place. And so here you have a widget, and let's say you need to display some code from a database, or you need to do something. Typically, that's going to be taken care of for you by this FlutterFlow built-in logic. But there are cases where FlutterFlow comes up short. It doesn't have the capability to do it. And I kind of explained to you by showing you some of the examples But the fact of the matter, there's going to be a lot of situations where FlutterFlow is going to come up short and you need to do it yourself. And so in this case, you're going to be building code. And so here we have custom code or just code using custom functions, which is what FlutterFlow calls it. They call the ability of you to introduce your own code as custom functions. And obviously this is going to be different depending on the exact tool you are using. Some tools don't even give you the ability to kind of inject your custom code. Other tools do give you the ability, and they call it various things. With FlutterFlow, this is called custom functions. And what you're doing is you're creating a bridge. Okay, you have your app, right? You have your app that's running. But in some situations, you need to go out and you need to add a number, or you need to multiply two values, or you need to negate a value by multiplying it by -1, or you need to do something else, or you need to maybe append two strings, or you need to append, a specific string to another string, or something like this, something fairly simple in most cases. And what you're doing is you are gluing two things. You are building a bridge from what FlutterFlow does already to something that you want to do. And so let's take an example in this courses app that I've built, this courses marketplace, okay? This is a regular app, and you guys may be familiar with apps like this. We have a home page, we have courses, and we have lessons. Now, the reason we need a custom function here is that if we view this right here, set from variable, and we take a look exactly what we're doing, we're essentially passing an index in list to a custom function, and all this custom function is doing is it's adding 1 to the value. And the reason we are doing is because when you are listing values, when it comes to computer science, you're going to be counting from 0. So if we didn't have a custom function, we would have 0, 1, 2, 3. But when it comes to humans count from 1, right? It would look very, very strange if you have an app and you are expecting a list, like a list of 1 to 10 or something, and it starts from 0. So instead of 1 to 10, you would have 0 to 9. And in this case, we have a custom function that adds 1 to our values, those individual values. And as a result, we have the right counting from 1 to 10. Now, I want you to pay attention to this glue, right? Remember, we talked about this glue here, this bridge, in other words. And so once we have this function is independent. It's independent. I can use it, in many situations. I can use it in lots of different data. It's not tied to any data. But the glue that's offered with FlutterFlow is that we have a function argument. And so we are passing a function argument, and we are getting back something else. So this function is kind of like a revolving door. Now, that's not going to be in all situations, but in 90% of situations, that is exactly what it's going to be doing. It's going to act as a glue. It's going to take input, and it's going to return output. So it's like a revolving door. You have a person that enters the building, and then you have someone else that exits the building. That's what the function is. It's basically a revolving door for the purposes of what we are trying to do when it comes to NoCode and FlutterFlow. And so in this example, we are passing an index in the list. So we have a value, right? An index in the list is an integer, okay? And I'm going to talk about kind of the mechanics of functions and how do they work in just a second. But in this example, we can pass anything. We can pass a list or an array, which is the same thing. But in this example, we are passing an index. And an index is going to start from 0. So 0 to 9, etc. 0, 1, 2, 3, all the way to 9. If there are 10 numbers there, 10 items. So we are passing an index to the list. And this function, right? So if we click on edit function, we have our definition, right? So before you can write the code, you need to specify the return type. We need to tell this function, we need to have something called a definition. And the definition is going to be, well, what is the return type? And that depends on a couple of factors. Well, number one, it depends on what we're trying to achieve. Okay, in this case, we are working individually, right? You can have a function that takes a list as a whole and returns another list. We can do that. And that is something that we could have done in this case. That is something that I could have done. But here's where I'm going to give you a quick tip, is that you want to simplify the function as much as possible. We could have passed a list here, but if we have an ability from inside of FlutterFlow to pass something simpler, we should do that. So what I mean by that is, this is where I'm passing the value, right? I can click on this and I have a choice. So if I click this, I have things that I can pass. Okay, so I have pass. So if I did not have this index and list, right? This is up to FlutterFlow, right? FlutterFlow was nice enough, right? They were nice enough, they were generous enough to give us an ability of passing this index. They might not have. And in fact, I'm not even sure this was available from the start. It might have been, or it might not have been. I'm not really sure, but this is a very, very programmer-friendly way of kind of passing the value. And so if they did not give us an ability of passing this value, we would have had to pass an array. And that would make our function a little bit more complex, okay? And when you are writing functions, you want the complexity to be done by FlutterFlow. You do not want the complexity to be done by you inside of your function. Remember, we are looking to leverage the tools that we're using as much as possible to the max. And so if we can pass an individual value and just add one to it, that's a lot better for us than if we had to deal with an entire array. And so what this means is that FlutterFlow is dealing with that array for us, right? They are iterating over that array. They're just passing that individual item there. And then all we need to do is add one. That is better for us. And then programming, that is better. That is better if we can simplify it, right? So very, very important to understand. So you're going to have situations where you're not going to have access to an individual item. You're going to have to pass an array, a list, whatever you want to call it. And in that case, you will have to kind of work with the function. But coming back to this example, we are passing an index. Okay, perfect. And actually, the way this works is that here we have an index. Like if we come in here, we have an index in the list, right? So if you open up index in the list, we're not passing anything because according to our function definition, this function is expecting an integer. That is why it gives us the ability over here of passing this index, because name is a string, video URL is a string, completed is a Boolean, which is another type. It's a true or false type. We can't pass it. Then you have a bunch of references. The only thing is this, the only thing that's an integer here in this example is this one right here. And that was very nice of FlutterFlow to do for us, because believe me, I've used many, many tools where you're not given this capability. You're not given this ability to get just the index. And so we have a function where we are expecting an integer and we are returning an integer, okay? And that gives us the best of both worlds, because all we need to do is say return value plus 1. So we're just incrementing it by 1, okay? And for those who are interested, this is actually Dart code. So this example right here, this is not even Flutter. This is Dart, because what you need to understand is that Flutter is a framework. And what is a framework? Well, framework is basically a bunch of functions, a bunch of different things of handling events, a bunch of higher level stuff that's been done for you by engineers at Flutter that handle a lot of the things that you would handle yourself. But Flutter itself is written in the Dart programming language, which is this language right here. So this example right here, and actually I would say like 90% of your examples when it comes to custom code are going to be written in Dart. You're not even going to be touching Flutter framework, okay? If you're building things like custom widgets and something higher level, you're going to be dealing with the Flutter framework. But in these examples, they're just so simple, so low level stuff that you're essentially going to be dealing with Dart. And that means very, very simple stuff. And that means easier for people, for beginners, for newbies to understand. And so what we're doing here is we have one argument, and you can have multiple arguments. For instance, if you're adding two numbers, you're going to have two arguments, right? If you're incrementing a number, that +1 is always going to be +1. So you have one argument as input. And so we have the input value. It's an integer. It's not a list, and it's not nullable, okay? And I'm going to talk about that in just a second. And the return type also, an integer is not a list, and it's also not nullable. And then you come here and you write the code. So in this example, I'm getting the value, I'm adding 1. Another very, very important thing is the testing, okay? When you are building the function, you always want to test it. So if it's 0, what is the function going to do for me? What is the result? The result is going to be 1. So I'm going to run it, and hopefully it's going to be 1. And so right here, this is the number of the test and the return type, which is 1. So if I run it again, it's going to be 2, 1, because I ran the test for the second time, but the value is still 1. Now I can also add another test if I wanted to, so I can have 2 tests and I can say 5. 5 plus 1 is going to be 6, so the result should be 6. The result is 6. Okay, so now I can delete this test. Very, very useful. You always want to be testing things. Now, let's talk about the different types that you're dealing with, okay? So the first is an integer, which is basically a number. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, without any decimal points. It's a complete number. It's a whole number. We have a double, which is a number with a decimal point. So 5.5, 5.25, 5 point, whatever, 1.2, 1.5, etc. We have a Boolean. A Boolean is a true or false. Okay, so something is true, something is false. You're going to use it all over the place. So you're going to use it maybe as input to a function. You may use it as an output. Many times you're going to have a function that takes a bunch of input and returns an output. So that's going to be a Boolean. A string is exactly what it says. It's essentially a collection of characters. So something like James would be a string, etc., etc. And here you have a bunch of parameters that you can pass that are more complex. So something like an image path, video path, audio path, these are all strings, but they are interpreted by FlutterFlow differently. And so if you have something as an image path, right, you have a return type image path, you can use this function in situations where you have an image. Okay, it's still a string, right? Dart does not know what an image path is, but FlutterFlow does. And in computer science, that's called a type, and that's called a strong type. So you are defining a strong type that allows you to link here this type. And that's very, very useful, because if your function is returning an image path, but you are, but your UI is expecting, let's say, a string, it's not going to work, right? It's not compatible. So that is very, very helpful. You also have things like color. You have a document reference, you have a document, you have JSON, timestamp. So all of these, beginning with image path and below, are called complex types. These are called simple types because they are understood inside the programming language. But these are called complex types because they are a combination of simple types. So something like an image path is essentially a string that can only be interpreted as an image in situations where you have an image. Same thing here in situations where you have a video, and in situations where you have an audio. So this is very, very helpful, because now you're building an app that expects certain data the way you expect it as a developer, the way you are programming it to work. So that is very, very helpful. And you have a lot of these other types that are pretty much self-explanatory, okay? Next, we have isList, right? So isList allows you to pass an array of these types. So in this case, we are returning an integer, but we can also return a list of these integers, okay? And so now, if you change this definition here, if you go into code, FlutterFlow changes this. This is not editable. This is called a declaration, a function declaration. It is not editable. This is editable. This is not editable. And so depending on what you have here, so if I change it back to false again, I can come back, it's back to int. But if I come here and I say true, I come back, now it's a list of ints. And so now this function is expecting that it's going to be returning a list of ints. And so the fact that I'm returning an integer is giving me an error. So it's telling me a value of type int can't be returned from the function because it has a return type of list ints. And so now what I did is I created a new list with just random numbers, and I'm returning a list. Okay, in this case, I'm no longer returning an integer, as was the case before. So if I come back here and I say false, now this is back to integer. So it doesn't understand why am I returning a list. when I should be returning an integer. So I can go back and I can say return value plus 1. Okay, now everybody's happy. I don't have any errors because that is how it was before. So the important thing to understand here is that you have a UI that essentially builds upon this function. What's important here is this function. This UI is kind of, it's kind of the training wheels, right? If you didn't have this UI, all you had is this function, you would still have an app that works. But because we're using a no-code tool, the objective here is to do the least amount of programming that's possible. And so as a result, we have this nice UI, but here we still need the code here. Now you can also do AI generated code. So you can turn this on and you can type in English, and pure English, what kind of function you want. And a lot of times it actually works. But to be honest with you, there are going to be situations where it doesn't work as expected. In my experience, it works something like 60 to 70% of the time. But it does get you on the right track. So if you kind of know what you want to do, using that tool is going to help you. And I only recommend this tool for more complex functions. So something that's more than like 5 lines, or maybe something like 10 lines. For simple things, like in this case, and then like in most situations, you don't really need this, right? You can use it still, but it's not very, very important. Now, there's lots and lots of things to talk about. This video would be several hours long if I covered everything when it comes to code and custom code. But I want to show you a quick example that's going to help you in many situations that you may be facing already, or situation you may be facing in the future. Now, let's say I'm dealing with an array, a list. So for instance, if I add a state variable and I call it my list, and let's say this is a list of integers, okay? I come in here, I select list, and I create this list of integers. So let's say I have 1, I have 2, I have 3, and then I have a duplicate. I have 3, I have 5, and I have another 1. And so what I have is a list that's 6 items, but I have a bunch of duplicates. And what I want is I want to just display this list without duplicates. Well, this problem is actually very, very easy to solve if you know a little bit of code. It's embarrassingly easy to solve. But if you don't know a little bit of code, this is going to be a pain for you to solve, because essentially you have to figure out which are the duplicates and filter them out, which is a pain to do. So I'm going to show you a way that you can solve this specific issue by writing one line of code. And hopefully this is going to motivate you to learn a little bit of code, just a little bit, so that you will have less hassle and less problems in the future. I'm going to create a new page, test page. I'm going to say create. And here I'm just going to add a list view. And this list view is going to be populated from my list. So I'm going to say local state, my list. I'm going to say confirm. I'm just going to say items. I'm going to say confirm. And now we have a list. So I'm going to add maybe a text to display each item there. Set from variable list item, confirm. Let's go ahead and center it to make it a little bit nicer. Let's also go ahead and make it a little bit bigger. Okay, that looks good. And so when I run it, it's going to show me all the items, including the duplicates, okay, as an example. So let me go ahead and create a new test environment. And so here's the page. We are seeing the numbers, but we are also seeing duplicates. And so in one line of code, I will be able to remove these duplicates. Let me show you how. We're going to come back over here. And instead of displaying these straight from our local store, we are going to create a custom function that's going to do so. So I'm going to come back here. And instead of going to local store directly, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say custom function, create a new function. This function is going to return a list, and it's going to take in a list. So the function name is going to be remove dupes, and we are going to have the return type as an integer list. And the function argument is also going to be an integer list. So I'm just going to say my list, and I'm going to say integer, true. I'm going to go into code. So here's our function. It's taking a list of integers and returning a list of integers. And here's my one-liner function. So if I test this real quick, we will see if it's actually working. So if I do 1, 1, 2, we should have 1 and 2. We shouldn't have duplicates. So if I run it, we have 1 and 2. We remove the duplicate. And what this function does is it takes the list and it converts it into a set. So what we have a set of my list, and then we convert it back to a list. And the reason this works is that if you look at this documentation, this is Dart documentation, we have something called a set, which is a list, but one that does not have any duplicates. So it says here, a collection of objects in which each object can only occur twice. And so this right here is a quick hack to deduplicate a list. So let me go ahead and save it. This function accepts a list of integers. We're going to say, well, we are passing our local state, which is my list. Confirm, confirm. And now instead of passing this local state directly, we are passing it through this remove duplicate function. We're going to say confirm. And so this is the old result. When we run it now, we should see 1, 2, 3, 5. That's all we should see. So let's go ahead and run it right now. And here's the newly updated version of the app. And as you can see, we are seeing no duplicates. We have 1, 2, 3, 5. And we're not seeing any numbers that are repeating. Okay, we only see each of the numbers being there once. And all of that was made possible by having a very, very clever one-line function that does something very, very helpful that would otherwise would be a pain to do. If you were going to go out and do it manually, it's going to be a pain to do. And obviously, you can use that function on any list. So it doesn't matter if it came from local store, Firestore DB, API, etc., etc. If you format it correctly, if you do it correctly, you can use the same function on pretty much any list, on pretty much any data. And so that is what I wanted to show you guys today. The fact that if you learn just a little bit of code, you get comfortable with just a little bit of code, you will be able to move mountains. And most importantly, you're going to have the confidence of knowing that you can pretty much build any app out there. And so knowing that in most of the situations, I can solve any of these problems by just adding a little bit of code, not only allows me to build just about any kind of app that I want to build, but most importantly, it gives me the confidence of knowing that I will be able to build the app that I want to build, even if a tool such as FlutterFlow in this case does not meet me 100% of the way. So if it meets me 80% or 90% or 95%, most of the time it's going to be at least 90-95% of the way, I know that it's never going to be an issue. I can always go out and build that last 1% myself with a very, very simple one-line code function that's going to do exactly what I wanted to do. And hopefully you've gotten a lot of value here, but most importantly, hopefully you understand that going out and making the leap and learning the ability to write that little custom code, writing those functions, far outweighs the fact that you actually need to write code, because this is going to be very, very useful. And in none of these situations, you're going out and building your own operating system or building your own JavaScript app. You're essentially just gluing two pieces together, two pieces of an app together, and that's going to take your no-code knowledge and FlutterFlow knowledge many, many levels above to where you are right now if you are not doing this. And like I said in the beginning of the video, I'm going to have a very, very detailed and a lot longer master class where I'm going to go into different situations. I'm going to talk about different things. And so if this is something that interests you, that is something I'm going to be covering exclusively to my Patreon subscribers. And if you're not yet subscribed, you're missing out. There's a lot of content out there, master classes, Q&As, live streams, etc., etc. You can sign up using the link in the description. So hopefully I will see you there. In any case, thank you so much for watching this video. Hope you've gotten value. If you did, you know what you got to do. Give this video a fat like. Leave a comment below. Let me know what you think. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already. And I will talk to you in a future video.